So when did you start making art with code? That was when you were starting, actually, so a long time ago, or
Yeah,
more
so
recent?
when I was about 16, so
Mm.
that's 34, 35 years ago, something like that. So with some people know this, Atari STs, the 512, so I started using that, and then PCs, a 286 PC with a maths coprocessor in it that made it run nice and fast at the time. So yeah, I was
Nice.
doing code then, and then my
Yeah.
arts degree was sort of half arts, half computer degree. It was one of the earliest ones that did it. And my final year course that was visualizing databases. So
Hmm.
the database is based on academic papers. So I would take biology papers and you take the data from it and encode it, and that would turn into what we see now as a hash, like a hexadecimal hash
Yeah.
string. And then that would control. I had these sort of spheres that got rotated and shapes. So a quick example is biology papers would sort of turn into these blue blob type of shapes, and chemistry papers would turn into these yellow spiky type of shapes. And
Hmm.
then by giving all of these papers a different like kind of icon or image, you could quickly visually sort them all out. But it allowed you to do a couple more things. So if you wanted a biochem paper, you look for something that was a mix between blue and smooth and yellow and spiky. So you go for a green semi-spiky shape. So even without knowing the data, you instinctively knew what to look for.
Oh.
But at the time, I was using a ray tracer called POV-Ray and slow computer, so it took a long time to actually generate these images. So I was very used to queuing them all up and then going to bed, and then waking up in the morning to look at like 100 outputs, and then going, "Oh,
Wow.
they're quite good." But
Hmm.
just before the end of my degree, I got really interested in the aesthetics instead of actually representing data. So I was like, well, instead of generating these, what happens if I take the best looking ones and I mix
Hmm.
those with other best looking ones? Can I slowly get even nicer aesthetic outputs? So that's what ended up happening is I'd run the computer overnight, get a whole bunch of results that I like the look of, and then try to improve on them. And that was really exciting. And that was very close to generative art. But the internet was just starting when I finished my degree, and they kind of went, "Do you want to be an artist for no money, or do you want to be a software developer on the
Yeah.
internet for big bags of cash?" I'm like, "I will take the cash, please." And then did that for like 25 years, pretty much. Um, but I always wanted to get back to doing art, which is where the first studio came from. Is I was working for museums. I was doing a lot of work in museums and cultural institutions. And I was going, I really want to get back to art, so I'm going to split my time into 20 hours a week working and 20 hours a week doing art with pen plotters. I always wanted to work with pen plotters. And I got my first studio, which was a bit old supermarket, and there was lots of spaces divided up, and it was freezing cold. And I
Hmm.
started all my time in there. So that's my first studio.
Nice. That's. I mean, it's amazing to see you were doing, something very similar to what we. It's probably already generative art, right? Back 30
Yeah.
years ago, and I wonder during those years when it wasn't as popular and the internet was starting, or maybe even wasn't accessible back then.
Yeah.
How did you learn, Dan? Did you have friends? Did you communicate with people that were doing something similar, or it was yourself alone doing this
It,
kind of work?
to start off with, it was me alone, and then I got onto a very early version of the internet, like CompuServe and things like that. And when I went to university, um, there were more artists, but they weren't really using computers. There was an artist called William Latham who did things that evolved. It had shapes that kind of people called it generative art at that point,
Hmm.
because the idea was that you bred these different outputs together. So if you like this one and this one, you put them together and make a new one, but you would introduce mutations to it. And everybody thought that this was the future of computer programming at the time. You would have these two different computer programs that did roughly what you wanted. You would slowly breed them together until it got better and better. And that didn't happen at all. That just stopped and died off. But that was kind of the seed of where it was.